So, also looking at the revolutionary lens.
Trying to
look at the revolutionary lens, but it's being a little rebellious. What are the active revolutionary and reactionary forces of the world now? What are their methods? Are we looking at more peaceful movements? Are we looking at more violent resistance? Like, what mentality is being brought to bear by revolutionary forces? And also, what results? What results are we seeing? An obvious comparison being the Middle East recently. People taking to the streets, sometimes nonviolently, sometimes more aggressively, and the results of several overturned governments that we're seeing now, also in the U.S., like the Occupy movement. So looking at what approaches are being taken by revolutionary forces, and also what reactions are coming from the established systems towards those revolutionary forces. What sort of crackdowns are we seeing? The interplay between those two sides. I think I'm going to hold on to the talking tide and move on to the critical mass gauge, which is looking at what systems are reaching their maximum capacity, what cycles are reaching the breaking point, looking at what hard limits are imposed, such as, again, going back to oil, peak oil as a very clear hard limit. Also looking at exponential increases and declines. We talked about exponential increases over the last 50 years, again, through more industrialized society. We see a lot of growth, just the rate of growth rapidly increasing, along with, that brings us to something we didn't talk about with the industrial resource and the life-sustaining resource gauge, which is looking at the relationship between those two gauges and seeing how exponential, for example, exponential usage of some of our industrial resources is leading to also an exponential decrease in some of the life-sustaining resources we have available to us. And one thing we mentioned also with exponential growth as a phenomenon, which harkens back to the child health and development gauge, is that there's an exponential rate of change in a culture, like as small seeds of change start, there's the potential for that to be multiplied and multiplied and multiplied generation to generation, as each generation born into a different system has a different starting place, has a totally different mentality, has totally different possibilities open to them. And I'm going to pass you back the tide and close us out.
Yeah, talking about this critical mass gauge, I'm going to link on this video Chris Martinson's presentation at the Gold and Silver meeting in Spain. He talks a lot about exponential growth when there's hard limits, like we're talking about in the critical mass gauge, and how there's a huge tendency for a steady amount of years to go by where everything's hunky-dory, and then it rapidly accelerates at the end because there's a fixed limit. And it's a really fantastic presentation, and he brings up the point that we've used more oil in the last 20 years than in all of our history with oil and using oil. And so that's a shocking example of what we're talking about exponentially. The last gauge that we're suggesting is the diversity gauge. And this is a very broad and very important gauge in all aspects. It should look at the diversity in everything. And this gauge will dive back into each of these gauges, kind of an overall lens to look at things in, realizing that the health of any system is increased when diversity is present. looking at it ecologically, the diversity of species. If we're looking at our current situation, understanding if diversity is shrinking, it could have negative connotations on the well-being of the systems in place. And I think you have some wonderful things to add to this.
I think basically that I don't need to say any more words.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, these are the gauges we've thought of, and whoever ends up watching this would be wonderful if you interact with us, communicate about these, give us your thoughts and your opinions, because two people can't come up with the gauges for an entire global civilization. And especially looking at our shared view gauge, it's obviously really important that we have a Venn diagram overlay of many people's thoughts. So, yeah. Absolutely.